Moving on to American whiskey. We're still on whiskeys with EY. Okay, so American whiskey, of course, when it says American whiskey, it has to be produced in the USA. Um, it can be corn, rye, barley, but generally when you're talking about American whiskey, you are talking about corn or rye. See, that's the difference. In Ireland and in Scotland, there was, I'm talking about ancient times, the raw materials that were generally available in abundance was barley, and compared to what in America, there isn't much barley available, or there wasn't enough barley available when the European settlers came uh, in the into America. What they realized, they had a lot of wild corn growing, so they utilized corn for making whiskey and other products, food. A lot of American cuisine revolves around corn and corn-based dishes. So of course, when the raw material is different, corn has a lot sweeter texture. It's The sugars are much simpler compared to barley. They don't have to be broken down to that extent. So you get a different product. You get a sweeter product as well. So American whiskeys, in my opinion, I feel that they've got a different texture to it compared to Scotch and Irish, and they have a typical 51% rule. That means um, any whiskey that is being produced, and if it's known as rye whiskey, the majority of raw material in that should be rye. That means 51%, at least 51% of raw material that goes in that particular whiskey should be if it's rye, if it says rye, that means 51% should be rye. If it's saying corn, then 51% should be corn. Things like that. So majority should be that particular ingredient. Rye whiskey, bourbon whiskey, Tennessee whiskey. These are the three kinds of American whiskey, and we will discuss this one by one. The first kind of American whiskey that we'll talk about is rye whiskey. Obviously, uh, as I said, the 51% rule in America says at least 51% of rye with other ingredients. Other ingredients can be corn, can be barley, or anything else. But if it says rye whiskey on the label, 51% of the raw materials or the ingredients that goes in the production of this whiskey should be rye whiskey. Sazerac Rye, that label that's in front of you, is an extremely famous, very, very prestigious label for rye whiskey, and it's wonderful. Especially 2 years in oak barrels, that's another condition. Bourbon whiskey, a very famous whiskey throughout the world. It has taken the world by storm for past half a century. Jim Beam, Jim Beam is one of the most common and famous labels. 51% corn, so the corn is the main ingredient. That's why you'll find these whiskeys are sweeter on the texture, on the palate. Um, Elijah Craig is credited to the invention of bourbon. Elijah Craig is also another label of bourbon whiskey. Third type of American whiskey is Tennessee whiskey. Now, Tennessee whiskey comes from Tennessee, which is a place in the US. This whiskey, although it resembles bourbon most of the way, has an additional step that is called Lincoln County process, in which what happens is whiskey, once it's produced in almost the same way as bourbon, 51% corn and stuff like that. Once it's produced, it is made to pass through sugar maple charcoal, which is maple is a wood in North America, and it is made to pass through that while the maple is burning. So what it does is that smoke gets into this whiskey, gives it that different smoky aromas, different texture, a sweeter tinge to it, a richer mouthfeel to it, and that's what Tennessee whiskey is. Most famous label, of course, is Jack Daniels. George Dickel is very famous, but that label out there, that is the world knows Tennessee whiskey by Jack Daniels. and it's wonderful. I think Jack and Coke is marriage made in heaven, as they say. So we finished whiskey and we move to rum, right? The origin of rum is, of course, in colonial West Indies, which is um, Jamaica, Haiti, Barbados, islands like these, which were both British and French uh, occupation. Uh, there's a lot of sugar cane that grows around in this area, and that was the same case 200, 300, 400 years ago. Um, so a lot of this sugarcane was being utilized in making sugar, but there was a byproduct of sugar which was called molasses, which you can see on the screen here, which is a thick brown liquid that comes out after the production of sugar, which is a byproduct, and it is not generally of much use. So it was, there was some intelligent, smart farmer somewhere who realized, or maybe a sugar producer, or who realized that this particular product, since it's of no use after sugar production, can be utilized in making a beverage which can be consumed. So and thus the production of rum started. Generally, in most of the cases, molasses is the raw material that goes in making rum. But in certain cases, sugar cane juice is also used in certain French colonial islands. That is the case. If that happens, that particular rum is called rum agricole, um, which generally means that it's more purer, much better, higher quality of rum, which is produced by pure sugarcane juice instead of molasses, which is a byproduct of sugar production. So, of course, that's a more premium rum agricole. Production, obviously, you need molasses, first of all. Then fermentation is done, which ends up into having liquid, which is sort of like beer. Distillation in column stills or pot stills or a mix depends on what kind of production you're talking about. If you're talking about a large, big scale mass production of rum, then obviously column stills would be the way to go. But if you're talking about more niche, low production, high quality kind of rums, then of course pot stills would be the way to go. Aged in oak, aging period depends on what time rum is being produced. So when you talk about clear rums, of course, there is no aging involved in that. Charcoal filtration after aging for white rum. So you got white rum, which is clear rum. You got dark rum, you got gold rum, and you've got spiced rum. Most of the rums that come out of distillation have some color in it, but they undergo charcoal filtration to remove all that color, and most of the white rums that you see out in the market are the product of undergoing charcoal filtration, so that the product that you get in the end is clear. So white rum or clear rum being the most common of them, obviously. If there's any aging after that, charcoal filtration is used to remove any clear, and these are the most common varieties of rum that you see for cocktails or for mixing and just general drinking, really. Dark rum, as the name suggests, are aged in oak barrels for a very long time. Sometimes those barrels are charred from inside, and since they stay in the barrels for quite a long time, it develops the dark color and intense flavor profile, which is full bodied, which has a lot and tons of character in it, and a richer mouth feel. Sometimes caramel can be added to it just so that the color becomes darker, but then sometimes there are chances that the quality might go down. Gold rum, type of rum which is matured in oak casks. but it's not matured for as long as dark rums. That's something very important to understand. So what happens is that since it's not stayed in the oak barrel for a very, very long time, it does develop color, but the color is not as dark or black as dark rums. They develop golden color, honeyed, nuttied nuances, um, a richer mouthfeel than white rums, but not as heavy bodied, as full bodied as dark rums. Spice rum, my favorite, are the kind of rums wherein there is an extensive use of spices like cinnamon and cloves and aniseed and cardamom, some barks, maybe some other spices, just to make sure that you got a different kind of profile, a flavor profile, than just having clear rums. This spice rum for the last few decades has been quite popular, as a matter of fact, and is being used a lot in various cocktails as well. So that's different kinds of rum for you. All right. So we move now to gin. Gin is derived from the word Genever, and its origins can be traced in Netherlands, and Genever is still a kind of gin that comes from Netherlands, so that term has still been maintained. But more interestingly, a little trivia about gin is, number one, it was called Dutch courage. Why it was called Dutch courage? Because was a time when I'm not sure whether English soldiers and Dutch soldiers were fighting together or were fighting each other. I'm not sure about that. But this is what I'm sure about, is that the British soldiers saw the Dutch soldiers having a little bit of Geneva before going on to the war, before going on in the battlefield, and that used to give them courage to go out there and fight. British soldiers did not have any gin before they went to went in the battlefield, so they felt a little scared. But they saw their Dutch counterparts and they saw, oh, they're having a little bit of gin, or Geneva as it used to be called, before going out in the battlefield, and that used to give Dutch soldiers that courage, and they just used to march right ahead without being scared. So that's where the term Dutch courage came. It's an interesting story, as a matter of fact. So, well, distilled spirit made from grains generally, and the USP, or the unique selling proposition or point, whatever you want to call it, about gin is the use of juniper berries. That's juniper berries on your screen right now. These are small berries that give the distinctive taste and aroma to this spirit. Um, the use of juniper berries goes back a long time ago, and it can be traced as medicinal, and as having medicinal properties. It was used, or to for kidney problems. It was used. It was thought that it used to cure kidney problems, and also, more importantly, plague. It was thought of a cure for plague, which it was not, but that's how the use of juniper berries happened in gin. Now, gin has terrible history and it has good history as well. Back in London in 17th century, gin was known as mother's ruin, because the gin production went so high that gin was cheaper than water and any other liquor. So there was so much gin in London that everyone in London was drinking gin, getting drunk, killing each other, and it was an utter chaos. The term mother's ruin comes from a fact that there was this mother who got drunk on gin so much that she dropped off her little baby in from the bridge down in the stream, and killed it. So that's the history gin has. But over a period of time after that, the production of gin was restricted, and now gin has, and after actually going through that history, gin after that went down and down and down and down. And the first half of 21st century, mm, the right up till the last 20 years, 15, 20 years, gin was not a very popular beverage. But in the last 10, 15 years, and even in the last 5, 7 years in India, gin has shown a revival. There are gin bars, gin pubs coming up with handcrafted gin, cropping up every now and then, and in India also some very very good quality gin is being produced. So gin is back. I personally love gin. Gin and tonic is my favorite drink in the world ever. A little trivia about tonic. Gin and tonic was coined in India, as a matter of fact. So tonic was mixed in gin because it has quinine. And quinine was thought to be a cure for malaria, which was very prevalent in India when during the British rule. So that's where gin and tonic came up. So it's gin and tonic is actually Indian, if you see. So London Dry Gin, one of the kinds of gin. Plymouth, Old Tom, and Geneva. These are the four kinds of gin. That's a little bit of history of gin for you. Very interesting topic of gin. London Dry, juniper, citrus peel, angelica root, and coriander seeds. These are few, and there are many other botanicals that can be used in production of London Dry Gin. Clearless, sorry, not clearless, colorless and clear. Contrary to the name, it does not need to come from London. On the other hand, Plymouth gin does need to come from Plymouth. Plymouth is a city in England where this gin comes from. It has a lesser influence of juniper berries, and it's a lot neutral and smoother, you could say.